I'm Cassandra Merritt. Everyone calls me Cass. I was 34 years old when I watched my own father shove my grandfather's wheelchair off a porch on Christmas night, down 2 steps and sideways into a frozen flower bed like he was getting rid of old furniture. Chair hit the ground slow. One wheel kept spinning in the cold, ticking like a clock that didn't know it was supposed to stop. My grandfather, Edwin Merritt, 76 years old, 88 pounds of stubborn dignity in a soaked wool coat, had just been thrown out of his son's house on the coldest night of the year. And I went with him. I thought that was the night we lost everything. 9 weeks later, a lawyer slid a folder across a conference table and told me what my grandfather had actually been carrying all those quiet years. The number on that first page didn't fit on a single line. Welcome to Silent Revenge. I'm your host, and tonight I'm telling you my own story. The one I've never put into words until now. If you've ever been the person at the table that nobody bothered to set a place for, stay with me. 'Cause this one's for you. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Let me take you back to before the snow. I build things for a living. Not furniture, not houses, software. I'd spent 11 years in tech, grinding through boot camps and all-nighters and jobs that paid nothing while I learned everything. The last 3 years, I'd finally landed somewhere real, lead engineer at a logistics startup in Portland, Oregon. That November, my boss pulled me into his office and said the word I'd been working toward my whole career. Quitty. An actual ownership stake. My name attached to something that meant more than a direct deposit. I'd built that the slow, unglamorous way, on ramen and late nights in a studio apartment I was finally paying for on my own, about 20 minutes from the suburb where I grew up. Nobody gave me anything. I liked it that way. The one person who ever looked at me like I was doing something right was my grandfather, Edwin Merritt. Eddie to the people he trusted. And by the time this story happened, that list had gotten real short. Especially inside our family. He'd had a stroke 2 years earlier at 74. After that, he lived in my parents' big craftsman house in Cloverfield, Oregon. In the downstairs office they'd turned into a bedroom. I called him every Sunday. I drove out twice a month with a thermos of soup and sat with him while his hands stayed busy. Because his hands were never still. Not even after the stroke took most of the strength from his left leg. My parents talked about him the way you talk about a leaky roof. Something expensive. Something you resent having to deal with. My mother, Patricia, would sigh and bring up his prescription costs like she was hauling him on her back uphill. My father, Gary, he mostly just left the room when Eddie's name came up. Cold. Disconnected. A son who looked at his own father like a bill that never stopped coming. I didn't understand it then. A man raises you, builds a life so you can have one, and you look at him like that? I kept thinking there had to be a reason. That kind of cold doesn't show up out of nowhere. There was a reason. Took me a long time to find it. The invitation came by phone in early December. My mother called on a Wednesday while I was in the middle of a code review. She got right to the point the way she always did. Christmas dinner. 6 o'clock. And then the conditions. She said the Beaumont cousins from Sacramento were coming up, that the evening needed to look a certain way. She said Eddie's wheelchair made the dining room feel like a hospital waiting room. She said maybe he'd be more comfortable eating earlier in his room before everyone arrived. I held my phone tight enough to leave marks. My sister Kendall got on next, 27, never embarrassed by anything in her life, and spent 4 minutes describing the earrings our parents had already bought her. Then she said, almost cheerful, that I should just leave Grandpa home so I could actually enjoy myself. I told them I'd bring him. The silence on the other end said everything. I said I'd handle his wheelchair, his food, all of it. They wouldn't have to do a single thing. What I kept to myself was this. I had already decided that Edwin Merritt was going to have one real Christmas in that house while he still could. I bought him a new flannel shirt. Dark green, thick lining, the good kind. I pressed it myself the night before. I should have taken that silence on the phone as the warning it was. I heard it. I just told myself nobody could be cruel to a 76-year-old man on Christmas night. I was wrong about that. We arrived at 5:45. The trouble started at the front door. No place had been set for the wheelchair. Tables sat 12 in a room that fit 10 on a good day. When I rolled Eddie toward the open stretch near the head of the table, my father stepped right in front of us. He looked at the wheelchair the way you look at something embarrassing. "That thing's in the way," he said, not even trying to keep his voice down, and he grabbed the handles himself and wheeled my grandfather into the corner by the china cabinet. The bad corner, where the grout ridge caught the front wheel every time it turned. Eddie didn't argue. He folded his hands in his lap and watched the room with those pale, patient eyes. The eyes of a man who had already seen this exact movie before. Dinner came out on the good china. Prime rib. Roasted vegetables. The full spread. My mother served everyone except him. When I asked for his plate, she waved toward the kitchen and said there were some leftovers from lunch. Cold turkey on a paper towel. That's what she meant. Now, I need you to understand something. That morning I had made a slow-cooked beef stew. Eddie's recipe. His mother's blend. 4 hours on the stove. I'd carried it out in a covered pot, hoping to add it to the table. My mother set it on the kitchen counter and left it there. Like it was something she didn't want to deal with. Kendall laughed at something on her phone. The Beaumont cousins talked about their ski trip. And my father, carving the prime rib at the head of the table, looked all the way down the length of it at his own father sitting in that corner, and said the line I will hear until the day I die. "You don't get a place at this table." The room went stiff for a half-second. Then Eddie smiled. Small. Teddy. And he said something so quiet that only the three of us nearest actually caught it. "You sat at plenty of mine." My father's face drained white. He set the carving knife down too carefully. That single sentence had hit him like a fist, and I didn't understand why yet. I should have let it go. I know that's what you're supposed to say. But I had watched a 76-year-old man eat cold leftovers off a paper towel while his family passed the good gravy right over his head. And something in me stood up before I'd decided to stand. I said it plainly. No yelling. No drama. Just the true thing out loud. I said, "He is your father and you are feeding him scraps in the corner." The room went dead quiet the way it does when someone finally says what everyone already knows. My mother told me to lower my voice. I hadn't raised it. I said, "There are 12 people at this table and not one of you will give him a chair." My father came around the table. I thought he was going to walk me to the kitchen, talk it out, save some face in front of the cousins. Instead, his hand came up and hit me across the cheek, hard, and the slap turned my head and rang in my ear like a fire alarm. 11 relatives looked at their plates. Kendall covered her mouth. But not fast enough. I saw the corner of it curl up. That tiny smirk she thought she was hiding. I have never forgotten it. Eddie started pushing himself up from the wheelchair. Arms shaking, his whole body fighting the leg that wouldn't hold him. I crossed the room and put both hands on his shoulders so he wouldn't go down. My cheek was burning. My voice was not. I looked at my father and I said, "You just hit me for asking you to be decent to your own father." He straightened his collar. And then he said it again, slower this time, like he was teaching me a household rule. "You don't get a place at this table. Either of you." That's when I understood. This was never about a chair. It was about who counted as family. And we had just been told we didn't. Eddie's hand found mine on his shoulder and squeezed once. Teddy. Almost calm. He was not surprised. That was the part that shook me. He had been expecting this. My mother made it official. She walked to the front door, opened it on the December cold, and let the winter air roll in across the entryway like a verdict. "Ouch," she said. "Both of you." She used the voice she uses to cancel subscriptions. No yelling. Just done. We're through with dead weight. That hit us both at the same time. I felt him flinch beside me. The only moment all night his face actually moved. I want you to know this, I did not wait to be pushed out. I was already turning his wheelchair toward that door. If he goes, I go, I told that room, and I meant it as a choice I was making, not a punishment I was handing out. Not a single person at that table said one word. My father followed us to the porch. Not to help. Not to take any of it back. Just to make sure we left. The warm light from the dining room spilled out around him. My pot of stew untouched on the counter. The door shut. The deadbolt turned. And we were two people and a wheelchair on a frozen front lawn. Here's the thing about being good in a crisis. You don't think, you just move. I tucked my coat over Eddie's knees and got going. Path hadn't been salted. The front wheel caught on a ridge of frozen ground and the chair went sideways into the dead flower bed, slow, almost gentle, like it was just lying down. His arm flung out from instinct. That reflex doesn't go away no matter how old you get. I had him back upright in about 15 seconds. His sleeve was soaked. His hand already red and stiffening in the cold. He barely weighed anything. I want you to really sit with that for a second. That's what happens to the people who carried us. They get lighter. And we don't notice until we're the ones holding them up. I half-carried, half-rolled him 40 feet to my car. Got him into the passenger seat. Broke down the chair. Crammed it in the trunk. Cranked the heat all the way up. Pulled off my own gloves one finger at a time and put them on his hands. He told me through chattering teeth that he was perfectly fine and that I drove too aggressively. I did not drive aggressively. I drove 20 minutes back to my apartment on roads that had turned to black ice. I talked the whole way about nothing that mattered just to keep him focused and warm. Coworker who'd quit, the menu I was planning for a team lunch, the traffic on the bridge. Anything. I carried him up one flight of stairs because the wheelchair couldn't make the turn on the landing. Came back for the chair. Got him into my bed under every blanket I owned. He shivered for over an hour. I made broth and held the mug for him because his hands weren't steady enough. Around midnight, the shaking stopped. He slept. And I sat on the floor beside the bed in the dark and figured out what came next. One income. One bed. A man who needed warmth, medicine, and someone who actually gave a damn. I didn't fall apart. I made a list. That's how I'm wired. What I didn't know yet was that the cold from that night had already settled somewhere in his chest. A clock had started running and I couldn't hear it yet. We built a real life inside 450 square feet. I gave him the bed and slept on the couch. Told him it was better for my back, which was a lie he was kind enough to let me keep. Mornings, I'd help him get washed and dressed before my shift. Evenings, I'd come home smelling like stress and bad coffee and find him by the window, hands always moving, a strip of scrap pine and his folding knife, peeling thin curls of wood onto a folded newspaper. The quietest, most purposeful thing I've ever watched a person do. First weekend, I fixed his wheelchair properly. The left front bearing was shot, had been for months. When I asked why he hadn't had it fixed, he said, "Replacing what you can still fix is how a man goes soft." So I oiled it, packed it, and got the grinding noise out of it. While I had the chair tipped on its side, I noticed something carved into the underside of the right wooden armrest. Small. Worn smooth from years of his thumb going over it. 2 letters. S and H. I asked what they stood for. He said, "Old habit," and redirected me to whether I'd used enough salt in the broth. Classic Eddie. That evening he finished whatever he'd been working on all week and set it on the windowsill. A little carved bird, a wren, round-bodied and alert, one foot lifted like it was about to hop forward. So full of life it felt wrong to look away from it. I'd seen him make these my entire childhood and never once thought to ask why. Stonehaven, maybe. I filed it away. When you're running on 4 hours of sleep and a budget that has no room for error, the strangest things stop seeming strange. I had no idea I was living right in the middle of an answer to a question I hadn't thought to ask yet. Money got tight fast. Eddie's medications cost close to $400 a month, even with a discount card. I picked up weekend consulting gigs on the side. Stopped buying coffee out. I tracked every dollar at the kitchen table after he went to sleep, running the numbers on a spreadsheet I kept on my laptop, making the math work by will if nothing else. Here's the thing about always being the responsible one: you never learn to ask for help. My friends would have spotted me money without blinking. I never told them I needed it. My mother called once in early January. Not to say she was sorry. To make what she called an offer. She said the guest room was available. That I could come back. Get steady. That everybody says things they don't mean at the holidays. And then, almost like an afterthought, the room was for me. Just me. Leave the old man somewhere, she said, and you can come home. I was standing in my kitchen with Eddie's stew going on the stove, the smell of it filling the whole apartment. I thought about the phrase somewhere. Like he was a dog she wanted me to drop at a shelter. The comfort you're selling, I told her, isn't worth what you're charging for it. I hung up. No slamming. I just set the phone down, stirred the pot, and looked over at the man asleep in my bed. The man who had never once treated me like a burden. And I understood that I had already chosen the harder path. And I'd choose it again without blinking. The first real crack in ordinary life showed up at a lumber yard. I'd brought Eddie along on a Saturday supply run. He wanted to get out and I wanted the company. We drifted into the wood section because he couldn't walk past a row of oak without running his thumb down the grain and telling me which boards were lying about their quality. That was his phrase. An older man in a canvas work jacket stopped at the end of our aisle. 60s. Sun-weathered hands. He looked at Eddie, really looked, stopped mid-step and stared. "You're not," he started. Cut himself off. "No. Couldn't be." A short laugh. "I'm sorry. You look exactly like a man I worked for a long time ago. Best in the whole business." Eddie smiled. Friendly. Easy. The smile of a man closing a door without making it obvious. "People tell me I have that kind of face," he said. The man nodded, slowly, not fully convinced, tipped his hat and moved on. I watched him go, then looked at my grandfather, who had gotten very interested in a piece of red oak directly in front of him. "Who did he think you were?" I asked. "Nobody," he said. "Long time ago." He wouldn't meet my eyes. And Eddie always met my eyes. On the drive back, I kept glancing at him. This quiet man in my passenger seat, who had just stopped a stranger cold in a lumber aisle. Best in the whole business, at what exactly? Some questions, once you notice them, just sit there and wait. My family didn't go silent after Christmas. That would have been a mercy. Instead, they kept a slow drip going, just enough to remind me that the door was open if I ever came back on their terms. Kendall texted a photo of her new earrings. Caption: "Enjoy your charity project." My mother sent a long message about how I was throwing my life away over a man who wouldn't see the summer. My father said nothing at all, and from him, silence was its own kind of message. Then Kendall called, hit my voicemail, and left 30 seconds I'll never unhear. "He's nobody," she said, like she was correcting my math. "You chose nobody over your actual family." I sat with that for a long time. The old version of me would have called back. Tried to explain. Tried to make them understand. But here's something I know now that I didn't know at 25. You cannot talk someone out of contempt they're getting something from. So I did the only clean thing available. I blocked Kendall. Then my mother. Then my father. One by one. And the apartment got quieter. And somehow a lot easier to breathe in. Eddie watched me from across the room. "You don't have to go to war for me," he said. I told him I wasn't going to war. I was just done handing them my evenings. He nodded slowly, went back to his whittling. If this is hitting close to home right now, if you've ever had to choose between blood and what's actually right, hit that like button. I see every single one of them. And keep watching, because what my grandfather was quietly carrying underneath all of this changes everything that comes next. Eddie started talking more in late January, the way people do when the nights get long and the body runs slower. Mostly stories. And almost all of them circled back to wood and building. He told me about a shop floor he'd run in the late 1980s. The smell of fresh-cut maple. The guys at the bench saws. A company he'd started in his own driveway with one employee, himself, and grown into something with its name on a building. Stonehaven Woodworks, he said. And his mouth got tight around the name. I asked what happened to it. He was quiet for a long stretch, peeling a curl of pine. Then he said, "The year everything got taken," like it was the name of a season. I asked who took it. He looked at the little wren taking shape under his knife and didn't answer that. Instead, he said the thing he'd say to me 3 more times before the end. "They can take what you built," he said. "Never what you are." I thought it was one of those soft things older people say to make the world feel more fair than it is. I told him that was a good way to look at it. He smiled at me like I'd completely missed the point, which, as it turned out, I had. He set the finished wren on the windowsill next to the others. 4 little birds, all facing the window, facing the light. He told me his grandfather had taught him to carve wrens. That the wren is the boldest bird alive for its size, makes more noise than birds 3 times bigger, and nobody takes it seriously until it opens its mouth. He said it without laughing. And there was something in his face I couldn't put a name on. Not grief. Not regret. Something that lived right next door to both. The year everything got taken. I should have pushed harder right then. I didn't. Soup was on the stove. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, and it looked like nothing special. I was sorting his mail at the kitchen table, pharmacy summaries, benefit statements, when I found a thick cream-colored envelope. Turn address embossed in navy ink. Whitmore and Calloway, trustees. And below that, certified mail. I'd signed for it at the door that morning without even reading the sender's name. Almost filed it with the medical stuff. Then the word trustees caught me. Inside was a single dense page. Addressed to Edwin R. Merritt. Halfway down, a line about a property tax matter on the Stonehaven industrial site. I read that line 3 times. Stonehaven. There was a phone number, a reference number, and a polite note asking him to confirm receipt soon. I brought it to the bedroom and held it up. "What's Stonehaven Industrial?" I asked. He looked at that envelope the way you look at a face from a dream you can't quite place. His hands, always moving, went still. "Old paperwork," he said. "Leave it alone." I asked him why old paperwork needed a certified letter and a trustee. "It just does," he said, in a way that closed the subject like a drawer being pushed shut. I've thought about that moment a lot since then. What would have happened if I'd pushed right then and there? But he was clear in the head. Sharper than me most days. It was his name, his life, his business. A man gets to keep his own secrets in his own last winter. So I did the only thing that felt both smart and respectful. I didn't throw it away. I tucked it into the inside zip pocket of my work bag. A small cream rectangle sitting quiet against the lining, waiting. But I did look it up. Because sitting with an unanswered question is not something I do well. On my lunch break, leaning against the brick wall behind the office, I searched Stonehaven Industrial, Oregon. What came back made me stand up straight. It wasn't a ruin. It wasn't a closed-down memory. It was a fully operating complex about 50 miles south of Portland. Satellite images, acres of roof, loading docks, a parking lot full of cars on a regular Tuesday. A home goods and custom furniture maker, according to one business listing, though the brand name on the signage had been scrubbed behind a holding company in the public records. I stood there with coffee on my jacket and tried to fit that picture against the man asleep in my apartment who sometimes had to choose between two of his medications because we couldn't cover both in the same week. It didn't fit. That night I went home and asked him once more. Gently. Trait. I said, Stonehaven Industrial is real. It's big. Your name is on a trust letter tied to it. If you're in some kind of trouble, if someone owes you something or you owe something, I want to help you. He took my hand. His grip was stronger than it had any right to be at that point. Cass, he said, looking right at me. I am not in trouble. I am exactly where I chose to be. Then he asked me to leave it alone. Not like he was brushing me off. Like one adult trusting another. And I honored it. 'Cause it was his. I told myself there would be time to understand it later. That was the one thing I got completely wrong. There wasn't much later left. There was one good day in early February and I carry it with me everywhere. My one full day off in 3 weeks. Sun bouncing off the snow outside. I decided to cook the way I cook when nothing is on the clock and nobody's watching. I made his stew, the real version, his mother's recipe, slow-cooked beef with a spice blend that takes most of a day to come together and absolutely cannot be rushed. He sat at my kitchen table and ran the whole operation like a man who had never in his life lost an argument about food. Too much heat on that pan. Let it sweat. You're browning it, not frying it. The apartment filled up with garlic and bay leaf and the smell of something slow and good. The kind of smell that makes a small place feel like home instead of a waiting room. We ate at noon. 2 full bowls each. He closed his eyes on the first bite the way you do when something tastes like a memory you thought you'd lost. After, he carved while I washed up. When I sat back down across from him, he reached across the table and held something out. A wren. Smaller than the ones on the windowsill and finer, the feathers scored in with detail the others didn't have. Patient, careful work. For you, he said. I reached for it. He held on just a beat longer than a gift normally requires. I only make these for people who'd never leave me out in the cold, he said. I didn't have words for that. So I just closed my hand around it. It was warm from his. I slipped it into my coat pocket. I have carried it every day since. I didn't know that little carved bird was about to become the most important object in my life. I just knew that a man who had been rolled out into the snow had given his granddaughter the thing he made only for people he truly trusted. And it was the wealthiest I have ever felt, not despite having nothing extra, but because of exactly what I did of sitting across that table from me. Hit subscribe right now if you want to be here when I talk about what happened next, because the next part of this story is going to change the way you look at the quiet people in your life forever. Cold came back hard in the second week of February. A real deep freeze, single digits overnight, and Eddie's body had apparently been waiting for exactly this excuse. Started as a cough. Kind you tell yourself is nothing. By day 3 it had real weight to it. He got quieter. Slept more. Waved off the stew he would normally have asked for seconds of. I knew the shape of what was happening before I let myself admit it. I had watched his wife, my grandmother, go the same gradual way 6 years before. The night his temperature broke 103, I called 911 without arguing with myself about it. While we waited for the ambulance, I packed a bag. His medications, glasses, the green flannel shirt, his small folding knife. And without really thinking about it, I tucked the little carved wren into the side pocket. Then the cream envelope from Whitmore and Callaway. Both of them together, because some part of me already understood that we might not come home from this the way we went in. He gripped the worn armrest of the wheelchair as the paramedics got him ready to move. His thumb found those 2 carved letters without looking, S and H, the way another person might reach for something they pray over. I locked up the apartment, followed the ambulance lights, and stayed steady on the phone with the hospital the whole drive. Professional. Calm. The way I always get when things get serious. It was only at a red light, alone in my car, that I said the real thing out loud. "Not yet," I told the empty car. "Please." "Not yet. Pneumonia," the doctor said. In a man with a damaged heart and a body that had already spent everything it had. I had been at the hospital 19 hours when my parents walked into the ICU waiting room. My mother in a good coat. My father half a step behind, looking at his phone. For 1 second, one stupid, hopeful second, my chest lifted. Then I watched my mother work the room. She found the charge nurse inside 60 seconds. Pressed her hand to her heart. Said loud enough to Carrie that the family had done everything for him, truly everything, for years. My father stood by the window, looking at nothing. Neither of them asked one question about Eddie's actual condition. Not his breathing, not his medications, not the conversation I'd already had with the doctor about his wishes. What they asked was whether he was lucid. Whether he'd been saying anything. That question landed crooked. Too specific. A hook dressed up as concern. I told them he was resting. My mother squeezed my arm in front of the nurse and said something soft about families coming together in hard times. The moment the nurse stepped away, she dropped my arm and dropped the warmth with it and asked me where his paperwork was. "His what?" I said. "His affairs," she said, smoothing her coat. "Somebody has to be practical, Cass." I looked at this woman performing love for an audience of people who didn't know her, while her father-in-law fought for air 20 feet away. And I understood. They hadn't come to say goodbye. They had come to take stock of what was left. He woke in the small hours, sharp and clear the way people sometimes get right near the end, one last bright stretch before the tide goes out for good. The machines hummed their steady hum. My parents had gone to a hotel. It was just us. He asked me to raise the bed so he could see me properly. He looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then he reached for my hand and pressed something into it. I realized he'd had me bring both the little wren and the cream envelope to his bedside, and he was returning them to me on purpose. "Keep those two things together," he said. I started to say something soft about him resting, and he cut me off. "Listen. When this is done, and it's nearly done, Cass, don't argue with me. You don't fight them at the funeral. Don't argue about the flowers or who speaks. Let them run that show." He squeezed harder. "Then you call Marcus Whitmore. His number is on that letter. He will explain what I could never find the right words for myself. I asked him to tell me now. While he still could." He shook his head. Small smile. "Some things you have to be shown," he said. "If I just told you, sitting in this bed, you'd think I'd lost my mind. Truth needs the right room to land in. The Marcus will give you that room." He looked at the wren in my palm. "They can take what you built," he said again, each word slow and deliberate, like he was handing them to me one at a time to carry. "Never what you are. Remember that, especially right after Whitmore finishes talking." I told him I loved him. He told me I was the only one in the whole family who'd actually earned the right to say it, and that he'd known what I was made of since I was 7 years old and gave my entire birthday cake to a kid at school who hadn't brought a lunch. Then he closed his eyes, still holding my hand. And I sat there in the hum and the blue dark, the machines steady around us, and I did not let go. He passed at 4:38 in the morning. Quiet. Without complaint. His hand went still in mine before any of the monitors caught up to it. "I won't perform grief for you. Some people fall apart out loud. I go very still." I sat with him until the window turned the color of old pewter. I thanked the night nurse who had been genuinely kind through all of it. I signed every form with a steady hand. Then I walked down to the parking garage, got in my car, and held that little carved wren against my chest in the thin gray light of early morning. I let myself feel it for exactly as long as it took the windows to fog. Then I wiped my face. And I started making calls. The funeral home he'd once mentioned while we were driving past it. My job. And then, because his voice was still right there in my ear, I took the cream envelope out of my bag and dialed the number on the letterhead. Left a voicemail for Marcus Whitmore saying Edwin Merritt had passed in the night, and that he'd specifically told me to call. I figured I'd hear back in a week. State matters move slow. Marcus Whitmore called me back in under an hour. His voice was careful, warm, wide awake, like a man who had been expecting this call for a very long time. "Ms. Merritt," he said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." A short pause. Then, "There is a great deal we need to go over, and almost none of it can happen over the phone." My parents took over the funeral within 24 hours. Just like Eddie said they would. They showed up the moment there was something to be seen managing. My mother booked the cheapest available service at a chapel across town and told the relatives it was what Edwin would have wanted: simple. She scheduled it for a Wednesday morning when the most people would have trouble getting away from work. They didn't ask me to speak. What they did ask me, again, was where his documents were. That question again, with the same strange hunger running underneath it. I let them have the noise, exactly like he'd told me to. There was one moment the night before the service, though, that I've turned over many times since. I stopped by my parents' house in Cloverfield to drop off a box of Eddie's things they demanded back. Found my mother alone in the kitchen. No audience, no good coat. Holding a coffee mug with both hands like she was trying to warm something that had been cold a long time. Without the performance, she looked older. Genuinely older. She started talking, not quite to me, more to the kitchen itself. Said she grew up with nothing. 2 outfits for all of middle school. Learned to smile so no one would see the worn-out shoes. Said poverty leaves a smell on you that no amount of money ever fully washes off. For one real second I saw the frightened girl underneath the hard woman. And I almost reached out. Then she caught herself. Set the mug down. And the shudders came back over her eyes. "Don't look at me like that," she said, sharp again. "We did what we had to. Some of us couldn't afford to be soft." And just like that, the moment sealed over. She told me to use the side door on my way out. I went. You can understand where someone's cruelty comes from and still refuse to let it set the terms. Marcus Whitmore called the morning after the service. I had buried my grandfather in a 40-minute ceremony where my father called him a complicated man, where my mother dabbed at eyes that stayed dry, where Kendall checked her phone twice during the reading. I sat in the back row with the little wren in my fist and said my Real goodbye in silence. When Marcus's number showed on my screen, I almost let it ring. Glad I didn't. He told me there would be a formal reading of Edwin's will required, given what he called the scope and detail of the estate, and that my being there was not optional. I asked him what scope and detail meant. He paused, choosing each word carefully. "Mr. Merritt left exact instructions for how this is to be revealed," he said. "In what order, to which people, in what setting. I have honored every one of his wishes for over 20 years, and I intend to honor this final one. Then, please don't sign anything anyone puts in front of you before we meet. Don't agree to manage anything. Don't let your father file as next of kin. And do not breathe a word about the trustee letter to your family." I told him I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. "Good," he said with real feeling. "Keep it that way for 10 more days." I hung up and stood in my kitchen staring at the cream envelope on the counter. And for the first time, I let myself sit with the thought I'd been pushing away for weeks. Whatever Stonehaven really was, whatever my grandfather had actually been all these years, my family wanted it. Badly enough to roll 2 people out into a frozen yard. And they had no idea what they'd thrown away that Christmas night. The reading was held 10 days later downtown in a glass tower on the 24th floor that I had walked past my whole life without once looking up at. Whitmore and Calloway took the entire floor. That was my first sign that 10 days had not come close to preparing me. The front desk knew my name before I said it. A young associate walked me down a hallway lined with framed photographs, Furniture, beautiful pieces, farmhouse tables, built-in shelving, hand-turned chair legs. At the corner before the conference room was one large frame with nothing in it but a logo, a small round bird 1 foot lifted about to hop. A wren. 2 letters beneath it in clean print, SH. Stonehaven. I stopped so fast the associate took a step back. I put my hand in my coat pocket and closed it around the little carved bird Eddie had given me. The floor seemed to shift slightly under my feet. It's an H carved into that armrest, worn smooth by 20 years of his thumb. His mark. On every piece his company made. Conference room was already filling. My parents sat near the head of the table in their good clothes. My father with 2 fingers drumming the wood. My mother's chin up. Kendall beside them, filming the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows on her phone. And at the far end of the table, in a charcoal blazer that was half a size too big, sat a man I recognized from a name I'd overheard in arguments through closed doors growing up. Dennis Pruitt. My father's former business partner. A real estate lawyer. A man whose name made Eddie's jaw get tight whenever it came up. Pruitt looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on the planet. He kept clearing his throat and watching the door. My family had come expecting to divide a checking account and a suitcase of clothes. They dressed for a 1-hour formality. The head of the table, a man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, squared a thick folder against the wood. He glanced, just briefly, at the empty space beside his chair where someone had placed a familiar old wheelchair. Worn armrests. 2 letters carved into the right one. Marcus Whitmore. He caught my eye. Gave the smallest nod. Then he began. He did not raise his voice once in the next 20 minutes. He didn't need to. He introduced himself as trustee and personal counsel to Edwin R. Merritt for 23 years. He said he would read the estate into the record in the exact order his client had specified, and that all questions should wait until the end. My father said with a short laugh that he was pretty sure this wouldn't take long. Whitmore looked at him for 1 even second, then opened the folder. The estate of Edwin R. Merritt, he read, consists primarily of his complete ownership interest in Stonehaven Holdings LLC, a privately held home goods and custom furniture company, together with its main operating business, Stonehaven Woodworks Incorporated. He turned the page. As of the most recently completed independent review, he said, the combined value of these businesses is approximately $940 million. The room did not gasp. It went silent. The silence of every single person in that room doing the exact same math at the exact same moment. My mother's chin came down. Kendall's phone dropped to the table. My father's fingers stopped mid-drum. $940 million, Whitmore said again, completely level, in case anyone had missed it. He continued. The estate also included all real property held by Stonehaven Holdings, 83 parcels across 9 states. Factories, showrooms, storage sites, and the main Stonehaven industrial complex outside Portland. He looked up. Several people in this room, he said with no particular emphasis, likely have furniture in their homes that Edwin Merritt built. You simply didn't know his name was behind it. He let that sit. Then he set his hand on the worn armrest of the wheelchair beside him, right on the spot where 2 letters had been rubbed smooth over decades of use. This chair, which Mr. Merritt specifically asked me to place here today, carries his personal mark. S&H Stonehaven. He carved those same 2 letters into every piece his company has produced for 18 years. He turned the framed logo on the table to face us, the wren 1 foot lifted. And this, he said, was his mark before he had a company at all. The bird he carved by hand and gave only to people he genuinely trusted. Across that table, my hand was in my coat pocket, wrapped around the exact same bird. Warm from 10 days of being carried. I understood then what I had been holding. My father found his voice first. Men like him always do. He was half out of his chair. This is absurd, he said, and his face had gone the color of old concrete. If this were even real, why was he living in my house? Covered his costs. I took care of him for 3 years. Whitmore let that question sit in the air long enough for everyone in the room to hear how hollow it was. Then he opened the second section. He laid documents out one at a time, naming each one for the record. A report from a document examiner. A power of attorney, dated to the week Edwin Merritt was in a hospital bed after a cardiac event, with his signature on it that the examiner had determined was not his. A share transfer agreement, moving full control of Stonehaven Woodworks to a 2-person partnership, signed while the founder was medicated and unable to give legal consent. A signature that isn't the person's, Whitmore said quietly, moves nothing in the eyes of the law. Those shares had never legally left this man. Then he read the 2 names on the transfer agreement into the record. Gary Merritt. Dennis Pruitt. Temperature in the room changed. At the far end, Pruitt stood up too fast, said something about having to step out, and found the young associate standing very calmly in front of the door. "Sit down, Mr. Pruitt," Whitmore said, without any edge in his voice at all. "You and your client are the same matter today." My father's face had gone the gray of a hospital hallway. "They stole it." The words came out of me before I'd decided to say them. Teddy. No yelling. Just the true thing. They forged his name while he was in a hospital bed and took his company. Whitmore nodded once. "Your grandfather knew," he said. "He had the documents examined as soon as he recovered. He made a deliberate choice. He did not want to spend whatever time he had left in a courtroom fighting the son he'd raised. He chose to start over instead." A pause. So at 53 years old, quietly, through a holding company with a new name, he started again from scratch. Over the next 20 years, he built something 10 times the size of what had been taken from him. He kept the original evidence of the theft in this folder, with written instructions that it be read aloud on this exact date in this room to the people sitting at this table. My father sat down. His legs simply stopped holding him up. The man who had looked down the length of his Christmas dinner table and told an old man he didn't get a seat, had just learned whose table it had always really been. Whitmore opened the third and last section. The way a person lays down a final card face up. Over the past 3 years, he said, Stonehaven Holdings acquired, through standard market channels and buying agents, the main outstanding debt of Cloverfield Home Goods Incorporated. My father's head came up slow. Cloverfield Home Goods was the company my father had built after taking Stonehaven. Company he'd renamed. The one I'd heard him describe on the phone as tight and behind on everything. Whitmore read the amount owed on the default notice. "The balance is past due," he said. "Stonehaven Holdings holds the top debt position and has the legal right to call the full amount immediately." He turned the last page. "Additionally," he said, "the home mortgage on the property at 22 Birchwood Drive in Cloverfield," his eyes didn't move from the page, "was taken over by Stonehaven Holdings 14 months ago." My mother made a small sound. Just one. That was their house. The craftsman with the warm kitchen, the deadbolt I'd heard turn on Christmas night, the porch where they'd watched us roll out into the cold. The roof over their heads had belonged, on paper, to the man they called dead weight for over a year. Her own words came back to me whole and exact. "We're through with dead weight." I looked at the folder. The wren on the table. The empty wheelchair with its worn armrests. And something in my chest went perfectly still. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. People who had rolled that man into a frozen yard had been sleeping under his name on a mortgage the entire time. The math of it was staggering. Whitmore closed the folder. Set both hands flat on top of it. "The full estate of Edwin R. Merritt," he said, "including Stonehaven Holdings, Stonehaven Woodworks, all connected properties, all ownership rights, and all legal claims arising from everything I have just read into this record, is left in its entirety to his granddaughter." He looked down the table at me. "Cassandra Renee Merritt," he read. "There are no other named heirs." My father stared at me across that table, and his face held an expression I'd never seen from him in 34 years. Not anger yet, that came next. This was the face of a man watching a door seal shut from the wrong side and finally recognizing the sound it makes. Then he erupted, out of his chair, shouting, "Fraud, manipulation, a sick old man taken advantage of, no court would allow it." He pointed across the table at me. He used the word owed over and over. Owed for the years, owed for the house, owed for the care. My mother shifted gears instantly, the hardness vanishing into tears that appeared right on cue. She was saying she had loved Eddie like her own family, that this was a misunderstanding, that surely her own daughter wouldn't put her out on the street. Kendall just stared at me. And for one honest, unguarded second before she pulled it back, something moved across her face that I had never once seen there before. Plain shame. There and gone in a breath. Swallowed back down. But I caught it. Dennis Pruitt had his face in both hands. And I sat in the middle of all that noise, and I felt the strangest thing settle over me like a hand on my shoulder. Calm. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just calm. Calm that comes from finally understanding that I never had to match their volume. Not once. Not ever. I waited until my father ran completely out of words. Then I spoke. Quietly enough that everyone in the room had to stop what they were doing to hear me. "You hit me," I said, "for asking you to be decent to your own father." He looked at me. "He built every table you ever ate at," I said. "The one you took from him. And the one you're standing next to right now." My mother started to say my name. I held up one hand. She stopped. I reached into my coat pocket and set the little carved wren on the table between us. That small bird next to a folder worth nearly $1 billion. And I said the words he'd handed me to carry, in his voice and mine at the same time. "You took what he built," I said. "You were never going to touch what he was." Nobody answered. 'Cause there was no answer. The loudest man in the room had gone quiet. And the woman nobody had bothered to set a place for had the floor. Whitmore looked at me across that table. And there was something in his expression, the quiet satisfaction of a man who made a promise a very long time ago and has just finished keeping it. "Shall we discuss?" he said. "What comes next?" What came next was not revenge. Not in the way that word usually gets used. I had 10 days to decide what kind of person I wanted to be at that table. I decided to be his kind. I told Whitmore to send the evidence file to the district attorney's office and to the state bar, and to let the legal system decide what it could still reach. Fraud from 3 decades back is genuinely hard to prosecute. Financial exploitation of an elderly person in recent years is not, and my father had handed them a clear paper trail. I had Whitmore move forward with the civil claim that actually mattered. A forged signature never legally moved those original shares, so the court worked to unwind the theft at last. The outstanding debt on Cloverfield Home Goods I let stand and called when it came due. The mortgage on the Birchwood house I did not forgive outright, but I made one offer through Whitmore in writing to my mother alone. A small apartment, 2 years paid, a soft landing she had not earned and that I extended anyway. 'Cause letting cruelty become my inheritance was the one outcome I absolutely refused. She turned it down. Called it insulting through her lawyer, the same week she called the original ruling insulting. So I stopped offering. "I'm not punishing you," I'd said to her at the end of the reading. And I meant it. I'm just finally letting the truth cost what it always should have. That is the whole of my revenge. Here's where everything landed because you deserve the full picture. My father was charged, roughly 14 weeks after the reading, with financial exploitation of an elderly person and fraud. The recent conduct, the part the law could still reach, and that case is still working through the courts. The civil court threw out the original share transfer. A signature that wasn't his had never legally moved a thing. Dennis Pruitt gave up his law license rather than face the review board, and the criminal exposure followed him out the door anyway. Cloverfield Home Goods shut down that spring. The debt came due, there was nothing behind it, and the company my father had run on borrowed time simply stopped existing. The house on Birchwood Drive was gone by summer. Every notice properly sent, every deadline properly honored. Kendall moved out of state. She sends a short text every month or two, no asking it, just checking in. That's the closest thing to an apology I expect, and honestly it's more than I thought I'd get. So I leave that door cracked. My mother I have not heard from. As for me, I said yes to the estate, which was the thing that scared me more than any amount of debt or cold or hard months ever had. I run Stonehaven Woodworks now. Not from a corner office I was handed, but as the person Edwin Merritt trusted to keep it honest. I kept the chair. Sits in my office, bad will fixed, 2 letters in the armrest. Visitors always assume it's some kind of design statement until I tell them it belonged to the man who started all of this. The little wren sits on my desk, facing the window, the way his whole flock used to face the light on my apartment windowsill. And in the break room at the Stonehaven plant, where 600 people build furniture every single workday, the Friday special is a slow-cooked beef stew. His recipe. His mother's spice blend. My hands. The smell of it moves through a factory floor he built twice, once when he was young and once when they thought they'd taken everything from him. The people on the floor don't know whose recipe it is. They just know it tastes like somebody took their time. Like somebody actually cared. That's enough. That is exactly the kind of wealthy he meant. My grandfather lost a company and built a bigger one. But the thing my family could never steal, never fake, never roll out into the snow, was the only thing that ever actually made him rich. Which was simply who he chose to be when nobody was watching. When the people who shared his name had made it very clear they didn't care. That's my story. One Christmas night. One wheelchair in a frozen flower bed. One cream envelope nobody thought to ask about. And a will that finally said out loud what a quiet man spent 20 years proving without ever raising his voice. If this hit something real in you tonight, if you've ever been rolled into a corner by the people who were supposed to save you a seat, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. People who feel small and overlooked deserve to know that their quiet isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the whole strategy. Drop a comment below and tell me, what city are you watching from and how far into the video did you realize where this was going? I read every single comment on Silent Revenge, every one, and your engagement is what keeps these stories reaching new people who need them. If this is the first Silent Revenge story you found, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I put out a new story every week, and I promise you every single one of them is built for the person who stayed at the table longer than they should have. Like this video if Edwin Merritt's story is one you're going to carry with you. And I'll see you in the next one.